The heavy glass doors of the high-rise office tower gleamed in the bright morning sun, reflecting the chaos of the bustling city below. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different, silent, polished, and precise. Every movement seemed calculated, every sound muted by the thick carpets and expensive furniture. Jameson Carrick, the CEO of one of the most influential tech companies in the nation, leaned back in his leather chair, a cold, sharp gaze scanning the reports on his desk. His schedule was relentless, his mind a constant flurry of decisions that shaped thousands of lives he would never meet. He was used to efficiency, precision, and control. But he was about to face something that no amount of planning or strategy could have prepared him for. It started with a soft, hesitant knock at the door. The kind of knock that belonged to someone too small to make an impact, someone unsure if they even had the right to be there. Jameson barely looked up. "Come in," he said, his voice clipped and practiced, the tone that made employees jump slightly when they entered his office. The door opened, and in walked a little girl, no more than 8 years old, clutching a small, frayed backpack. Her hair was a tangled mass of dark curls, her shoes slightly too big for her tiny feet, and her eyes, wide, innocent, and somehow painfully aware of the world, locked onto Jameson with a quiet courage that took him by surprise. She stopped in the middle of the room, looked up at the towering shelves of awards and certifications, and in a voice that barely rose above a whisper said, "Mom's sick, so I came instead." For a moment, the room was silent. The clock ticked loudly. The assistants who usually hovered outside were frozen in the hallway, unsure whether to intervene. Jameson's trained mind raced. A million questions tried to surface, but none of them were relevant. There was no one else in the building at this hour who would dare come into his office unannounced. And yet, there she was, standing there with a bravery and innocence that disarmed him instantly. Before we continue, if you believe in the power of kindness and second chances, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Journal. Stories like this remind us that compassion can change lives. Jameson motioned for her to sit on the low leather chair in front of his desk. "Are you alone?" he asked carefully, his voice softer now. The little girl nodded, fidgeting with the straps of her backpack. "Mom's at home, she's sick, and she said she needed this, for her job." Her tiny hands produced a neatly folded envelope, worn at the edges, containing papers that she handed to him with a tremble. As Jameson unfolded the documents, he realized they were a proposal, an innovative, well-researched pitch that was meant for a senior executive meeting. The handwriting was careful but hurried, the calculations meticulous. It was clear that the little girl wasn't just delivering papers. She was delivering her mother's trust, her hope, and, perhaps unknowingly, a piece of herself into a world that often overlooked the smallest voices. The room felt unusually heavy. Jameson had seen countless presentations, reviewed thousands of proposals, and sat through meetings with grown professionals who commanded rooms with their presence. But here, in front of him, was a child carrying the weight of responsibility that no one should bear at her age. His mind flickered briefly to his own childhood, a distant memory of a small boy trying desperately to be seen in a world that only valued results. And for the first time in years, he felt something stir beneath his carefully curated exterior, empathy. He motioned for her to stay seated and picked up the papers, scanning them. The numbers were solid. The ideas innovative. The presentation, while simple, demonstrated a clarity and vision that was unusual even among adults. Jameson realized something shocking: the little girl wasn't just her mother's messenger, she was her mother's mind in miniature. She had absorbed, internalized, and could now articulate the very essence of her mother's work. Jameson looked up at her, and for the first time, the wall of corporate detachment he had built around himself began to crumble. "Did your mom teach you how to do this?" he asked gently. She nodded, eyes shining with pride. "She says I'm her helper. I wanted to make sure she didn't get in trouble at work." The honesty in her voice was humbling. Here was a child who didn't understand corporate hierarchies, board meetings, or business jargon. She only understood responsibility, love, and the urgent desire to help someone she cared about. Jameson felt a lump in his throat, a sensation he hadn't felt in decades, a mixture of admiration, sorrow, and an almost overwhelming protectiveness. He leaned back in his chair and studied her carefully. "Do you know what you've done today?" he asked. The little girl shook her head, her curls bouncing with the movement. "You've reminded me," he continued slowly, "that sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest truths." He smiled softly, a rare, unguarded expression that made her look up at him with wonder. Over the next hour, Jameson and the little girl went over the proposal together. She answered questions he hadn't expected her to understand, explaining ideas in her own simple but profoundly insightful way. Every now and then, he would glance at her, amazed that someone so young could command such focus and clarity. By the time the meeting concluded, he knew he had seen something extraordinary. The assistant peeked into the office, hesitant. "Mr. Carrick, your 10 a.m. is waiting," she said, her voice unsure. Jameson shook his head. "Not today," he replied, then turned to the little girl. "I think your mom would be very proud of you." Her lips curved into a small, shy smile, and for a moment, the room felt warmer, softer, more alive. She stood, ready to leave, and Jameson found himself doing something he rarely did. He offered her a small gift, a notebook and a pen, engraved with her initials. "For your ideas," he said simply. "Keep helping your mom, and don't ever stop believing in what you can do." The little girl accepted it with a quiet nod, and as she walked out, Jameson felt a strange emptiness settle over the office. But it was not a painful emptiness, it was the space left by something rare and profound, the reminder of what really mattered. For years, he had chased numbers, profits, and accolades, but today, a small child had reminded him of humanity, courage, and the unspoken bonds of love and duty. Days turned into weeks, and the story of the little girl and her extraordinary visit became quietly known among the staff. The proposal was accepted, and her mother, Claire, was called to the office to meet Jameson personally. She arrived, exhausted from illness, and was met not with reprimand or critique but with gratitude and admiration. Jameson had insisted on thanking her properly, noting that her ideas, and the courage to entrust them to her daughter, had changed the company's trajectory. But it wasn't just the professional acknowledgement that mattered. For Claire, it was witnessing the strength of her child, the quiet bravery that had once seemed so ordinary at home but now shone in a world she had feared was too harsh for anyone so small. Claire realized, with a mixture of awe and relief, that her daughter's courage had not only carried her work forward but had also awakened something in the people around her, especially someone as distant and unapproachable as Jameson. Jameson himself found a subtle transformation taking place. He began looking at his office, his employees, and even his own life differently. The little girl's visit had reminded him that power was not measured by titles or wealth, but by the capacity to recognize, nurture, and protect the spark in others, no matter how small. He became more attentive, more human, and more willing to pause and see the extraordinary in what might otherwise be overlooked. Weeks later, the girl returned to deliver another message, this time with her mother feeling better. Jameson greeted her warmly, asking about school and her life beyond the office walls. She chatted easily, her confidence growing, her eyes no longer timid but sparkling with the understanding that she had made a difference. Her presence, her honesty, and her unwavering sense of responsibility had shifted the atmosphere of the office in subtle but undeniable ways. Before the story concludes, if this tale touched your heart, please engage with this video, like, comment, and share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness, courage, and small acts of bravery can create enormous ripples. And as a special commemorative note, dedicate a moment today to acknowledge the quiet heroes in your own life, the children, the caregivers, and the everyday people whose courage often goes unseen but whose impact is immeasurable. By the end of that extraordinary week, Jameson had made a decision that surprised even him. He launched a program within the company to support employees' families in crisis, ensuring that no child or parent would ever have to carry such weight alone. He credited the initiative